Commander Vexthul Mordai stood before the great council chamber on Nexus Prime Station. His forearms hung at his sides, and the old scars on his blue-scaled face caught the harsh light from above. The chamber was filled with representatives from dozens of alien species, all waiting to hear his words. Some had faces like birds, others looked like walking trees, and a few resembled giant insects. They all stared at him with eyes that showed curiosity, mixed with fear. The Zephyrian commander had not wanted to come here today. For 15 years he had tried to forget the war against the humans. He had tried to forget the screams, the blood, and the terrible things he had seen. But the Galactic Council's War Crimes Investigation Committee had called him, and he could not refuse. They wanted to know about human warfare tactics. They wanted to understand why the Zephyrian Empire, once the strongest military force in the galaxy, had never been the same after fighting the humans. Council Representative Cathara, a tall alien with silver skin and no visible mouth, spoke first. Her voice came from a device on her chest. Commander Vexthul, you served as a battalion leader during the invasion of the human colony world New Denver. Please tell us what happened there. Vexthul's hands began to shake slightly. He gripped the speaking podium with two of his arms, while the other two hung loose. Representatives of the council, he began, his voice rough from years of trying not to speak about these memories. What I saw during that war changed me forever. It changed all of us who fought the humans. Before I tell you about New Denver, you must understand something important. We thought we knew what war was. He paused and looked around the chamber. Many of the aliens had fought wars before. The bird-like Altarians had conquered 3-star systems. The insect hive lords had destroyed entire planets. The tree people of Verdania had wiped out 2 other species completely. They all thought they understood warfare. The Zephyrian Empire had defeated 12 different species before we met the humans, Vexthul continued. We had the best weapons, the strongest ships, and the most experienced soldiers in the galaxy. When we received reports about human colonies spreading into our territory, our generals laughed. Humans were new to space travel. They had no real military tradition. Their technology was at least 50 years behind ours. It should have been easy. The commander's voice grew quieter, and the entire chamber leaned forward to hear him. Our intelligence reports said that New Denver had about 2 million human civilians and maybe 10,000 soldiers. Our invasion force had 50,000 elite Zephyrian troops, advanced armor, and complete air superiority. The battle should have lasted 3 days at most. Vexthul closed his eyes for a moment, remembering. When our transport ships landed, outside the main city, everything seemed normal at first. The human military had set up defensive positions around the city center, just like we expected. Our artillery destroyed their positions in the first hour. Our aircraft bombed their supply lines. By the end of the first day, we had surrounded the city and cut off all escape routes. But something was wrong, the commander said, his voice growing stronger. The city was too quiet. When our scouts entered the outer districts, they found empty buildings. The humans had evacuated most of the civilians, but they had done it in a strange way. They left behind personal belongings, family, photos, children's toys scattered on the ground. It looked like people had left in a hurry, but there were no signs of panic. Several council members shifted in their seats. This did not sound like the beginning of a normal battle. On the walls of empty houses, we found messages written in human language, Vexthul continued. Our translators told us, they said things like, remember us, and this is our home, and we will be back. At first, we thought these were just the desperate words of frightened civilians. We were wrong. The commander's 4 arms began to move as he spoke, gesturing in the way his people did when they were deeply emotional. The real fighting began on the second night, not with soldiers in uniforms, but with shadows that moved in the darkness. A human child, maybe 12 years old, threw a homemade bomb at one of our patrols. The explosion killed 3 of my soldiers. When we tried to catch the child, she disappeared into the ruins like smoke. An old human man, so elderly he could barely walk, shot 2 of our sentries with an ancient hunting rifle. When we surrounded the building where he was hiding, we found him sitting in a chair, reloading his weapon. He looked at us and said something, in his language that our translator could not understand. Then he shot himself rather than surrender. The chamber was completely silent now. Even the insect representatives who usually made clicking sounds with their mandibles were quiet. But the worst part, Vexthul said, his voice beginning to crack, was not the attacks themselves. It was the look in their eyes. These humans, children, elderly people, civilians with no military training, they looked at us like we were the ones who should be afraid. They had no chance of winning, but they fought anyway. They fought like they were protecting something more important than their own lives. The commander stopped speaking for a moment and wiped moisture from his eyes with one of his hands. In Zephyrian culture, showing emotion in public was considered shameful, but he could not help himself. On the third day, we captured a human woman who had been making bombs in her basement. She was maybe 30 years old with brown hair and green eyes. When we interrogated her, she told us that her husband was a soldier fighting on the front lines, and her 2 children had been evacuated to another planet. We asked her why she stayed behind to fight when she could have escaped with her children. Vexthul's voice dropped to almost a whisper. She looked at me with those green eyes and said, "Because if I don't fight here, you'll follow my children there." Then she smiled and said, "Besides, this is my home. You can't have it." We offered her medical treatment for her injuries. We offered her safe passage to rejoin her family. We offered her credits, food, anything she wanted if she would just tell us where the other resistance fighters were hiding. She refused everything. Finally, our interrogation specialist threatened to hurt her if she did not cooperate. The commander's hands were shaking openly now. She laughed. She actually laughed at us. She said, "You already hurt me the day you landed on my world. Do you think I'm afraid of a little more pain?" Then she told us that every human on New Denver would rather die than let us keep their planet. She said we could kill every single one of them, but we would never truly win, because other humans would come to take back their world. That night she escaped from our detention center. We never found out how. But 2 days later our supply depot exploded, and we found a message spray-painted on a nearby wall in the human language. It said, "Told you this was my home. Katie." We realized it was the same woman we had captured. Vexthul looked around the chamber at all the alien faces staring at him, representatives of the council. In that moment, I began to understand that we were not fighting an army. We were fighting an entire species that would rather die than accept defeat. Every human civilian was a potential soldier. Every human child was a future threat. Every human elder was a keeper of the hatred that would be passed down to the next generation. And the most terrifying part, he concluded, was that they were not driven by hatred at all. They were driven by love. Love for their families, love for their homes, love for their way of life. That love made them more dangerous than any weapon we had ever faced. The chamber remained silent as the weight of his words settled over the assembled representatives. They were beginning to understand why the Zephyrian Empire had never been the same after the war with humanity. Commander Vexthul took a deep breath and continued his testimony. The alien representatives in the council chamber leaned forward, waiting for him to speak again. His forearms trembled as he gripped the podium tighter. "What I told you about, the civilians, was only the beginning," he said, his voice growing harder. "The real horror started when we finally met the human military forces. Representatives of the council, I have fought against many species in my career. I have seen brave warriors and cowards, skilled soldiers and amateurs, but I had never seen anything like the human Marines at Firebase Omega." The commander paused and looked around the chamber. Firebase Omega was a small human military outpost built on a hill overlooking the main valley on New Denver. It had maybe 200 human soldiers inside. Our intelligence said they had basic weapons and limited supplies. My division had 3,000 elite troops, heavy artillery, and air support. The base should have fallen in one day. Vexthul's voice became quieter, more haunted. The siege lasted 6 weeks. 6 weeks of fighting against 200 humans who refused to understand that they were beaten. Every morning we demanded their surrender. Every morning they fired back at us. Every day we killed some of them. Every day the survivors kept fighting. One of the insect representatives clicked its mandibles. Commander, surely 200 soldiers could not hold off 3,000 for so long. What tactical advantages did they have? None, Vexthul replied, immediately. They had no advantages at all. Their weapons were older than ours. Their armor was weaker. They had no air support and no hope of rescue. They should have surrendered after the first week when we cut off their water supply. They should have given up after the second week when we destroyed their communication equipment. They should have begged for mercy after the third week when we started bombing them every day. The commander's eyes grew distant as he remembered. Instead, they dug deeper into their bunkers. They rationed their food and collected rainwater to drink. When their medical supplies ran out, they made bandages from torn clothing. When their ammunition got low, they made every shot count. And when we finally broke through their outer defenses, we found something that still gives me nightmares. In the deepest bunker of Firebase Omega, we found Lieutenant Jake Morrison. He was maybe 25 years old with brown hair and blue eyes. He had been shot 7 times, his left arm was broken, and he could only use 2 fingers on his right hand. He was alone, sitting behind a pile of sandbags, still trying to load bullets into a rifle that had been damaged by shrapnel. Vexthul's voice cracked slightly. When my soldiers surrounded him, he looked up at us and smiled. He actually smiled. I asked him where the other survivors were, and he said they had died fighting. I told him the war was over for him, that he should surrender and we would give him medical treatment. Do you know what he said to me? The commander asked the council. He said, "Thanks for the offer, sir, but I've got a job to finish." Then he pulled out 2 grenades with his good hand and pulled the pins with his teeth. My soldiers and I barely escaped the bunker before the explosion. The chamber was silent except for the soft humming of the air recycling systems. Several representatives looked uncomfortable. But Jake Morrison was not the worst example, Vexthul continued. 3 days after Firebase Omega fell, we received reports that human soldiers were attacking our supply convoys 50 kilometers behind our front lines. Impossible, we thought. All human forces in that area had been eliminated. We sent a full company to investigate. The commander's 4 hands clenched into fists. The attacks were being carried out by one person, one human woman named Captain Lisa Hart. She was a Special Forces soldier who had been cut off from her unit during our advance. Instead of trying to escape or hide, she had decided to make our lives as difficult as possible. For 3 weeks, Captain Hart moved through the forest like a ghost. She would attack our patrols, steal supplies, and rescue wounded human soldiers who had been left behind. Our scouts could never catch her. Every time we thought we had her cornered, she would disappear. Vexthul's voice grew softer, more respectful. The most incredible thing happened during the evacuation of Hill 437. We had overrun a human medical station and wounded 12 of their soldiers. They were too badly injured to move, so we left them to die. Captain Hart found them. She spent 3 hours walking back and forth through a kill zone where 6 of our snipers had clear shots at her. She carried those wounded soldiers one by one to safety, making 12 trips through ground where any normal person would have died in seconds. She was shot 4 times, but she kept walking. She never ran, never took cover, just walked steadily, back and forth carrying her wounded comrades. The commander paused and wiped his eyes. After the first hour, our snipers stopped shooting at her, not because they felt mercy, but because they could not understand what they were seeing. Here was a human who knew she was going to die, but she kept saving others anyway. It broke something in their minds. When Captain Hart finally collapsed from blood loss after saving the last wounded soldier, our medics ran out to help her. They could not stand to watch her die after what she had done. She lived for 2 more days in our medical tent, and during that time, she never complained about her pain or asked for anything. She just wanted to know if the soldiers she had saved were going to be okay. Representative Cathara spoke up. "Commander, did Captain Hart survive her injuries?" Vexthul shook his head slowly. "No, but before she died, she asked to speak with me. I expected her to curse me or threaten revenge or beg for her life. Instead, she thanked me for treating her wounds and asked me to tell her family that she had done her duty." Then she smiled and closed her eyes. The commander's voice became even quieter. The worst part was that saving those 12 soldiers made no difference to the outcome of the war. They were just 12 people out of millions. But Captain Hart died for them anyway because to her those 12 lives were worth everything. The third example I must tell you about is Major Alex Stone, Vexthul continued. He was the tactical officer for the human forces defending the city of New Portland. When we surrounded the city, he was in command of the final defensive line, with maybe 50 soldiers left. Major Stone realized that his position was hopeless. We had 10,000 troops ready to overrun his defenses, but behind his position were 3 hospitals full of wounded civilians and soldiers who could not be moved. If we broke through his line, thousands of innocent people would die. The commander's forearms began to shake again. Major Stone made a decision that I still cannot understand. He called for artillery fire on his own position. He ordered the human ships in orbit to bomb the hill where he and his soldiers were fighting, knowing it would kill all of them. When our communications specialists intercepted his final transmission, they brought it to me immediately. Major Stone was talking to someone far away, probably his wife or family. He said, "Tell Susan I kept my promise to come home safe. Tell her I'm coming home now." Then he said, "All units, this is actual. Send it." Vexthul closed his eyes, remembering. The bombardment killed Major Stone and all 50 of his soldiers instantly, but it also killed 400 of my troops who were advancing up the hill. More importantly, it gave the hospitals time to evacuate the wounded civilians. Major Stone traded his life and the lives of his soldiers to save people he had never met. After the bombing stopped, we found his body in the crater. He was still holding a photograph of a woman with blonde hair and 2 small children. On the back of the photograph, someone had written, "Come home safe, Daddy, we love you." The council chamber was completely silent now. Several representatives were openly showing signs of distress. These 3 examples, Vexthul said, his voice barely above a whisper, taught me something terrible about human beings. They do not fight because they hate their enemies. They fight because they love something more than they fear death. Lieutenant Morrison loved his duty. Captain Hart loved her fellow soldiers. Major Stone loved his family and innocent strangers he would never meet. That love makes them impossible to defeat in the way we understand defeat. You can kill a human soldier, but you cannot break their spirit. You can destroy their weapons, but you cannot destroy their will to fight. You can surround them, outnumber them, and cut off all hope of rescue, but they will keep fighting anyway. The commander looked around the chamber one final time. Representatives of the council. After Firebase Omega fell, after Captain Hart died, after Major Stone sacrificed himself, I thought the worst was over. I thought we had seen the limits of human determination. I was wrong. What came next was far worse, because the humans stopped defending and started hunting us. Commander Vexthul's voice grew darker as he continued his testimony before the Galactic Council. The alien representatives sat in uncomfortable silence, waiting for him to speak again. His forearms moved restlessly as he gripped the podium, and his blue-scaled face showed deep lines of pain and memory. "What I have told you so far was difficult to witness," he said slowly. "But it was still war as we understood it. Soldiers fighting soldiers, even if the humans fought in ways that seemed impossible. What happened next changed everything. The humans stopped being defenders and became hunters. They stopped trying to protect their world and started trying to destroy us." The commander paused and looked around the chamber. "It began 3 months after we conquered most of New Denver. Our forces controlled all the major cities and military bases. The human government had officially surrendered, and most of their surviving military had evacuated to other worlds. We thought the war was over. We were celebrating our victory when the real nightmare began." Vexthul's voice became quieter, more haunted. "My company was stationed in the northern mountains, guarding a supply route between 2 captured cities. It was supposed to be safe duty, almost like being on vacation. The area had been cleared of human forces months earlier. There were no military targets nearby, no strategic importance to the location. Just a quiet mountain road through the forest. That was when we met Sergeant Ben Collins," the commander said, and several representatives noticed how his hands began to shake when he spoke the name. "For 3 weeks, Sergeant Collins hunted my soldiers like animals, not fighting us in open battle, but picking us off one by one, day after day, until my men were afraid to leave their bunkers. It started on a Tuesday morning. Vexthul continued. Private Kethamol was on guard duty at our main gate. He was young, maybe 20 years old in human terms, and this was his first deployment. We found him at his post the next morning with a single bullet wound to the head. His weapon was still in his hands, and there were no signs of a struggle. The human had killed him so quietly that the guards 20 meters away heard nothing, the say. Commander's voice grew more strained. The next day it was Corporal Zexhan. He was checking the perimeter fence when he disappeared. We found his body hanging from a tree branch, but that was not the worst part. The worst part was the note, pinned to his uniform, written in our language. It said, 37 more to go. BC. We realized then that someone was keeping count of my soldiers. There were 38 troops in my company when the killing started. Someone was planning to murder every single one of us. Representative Cathara interrupted. Commander, why did you not request reinforcements or air support to hunt down this individual? Vexthul laughed bitterly. We tried everything. We sent out search patrols, but they never found any trace of him. We brought in tracking equipment, but he left no trail to follow. We called for air support, but the forest was too thick for aerial reconnaissance. Sergeant Collins had spent months learning every tree, every rock, every hiding place in those mountains. We were fighting him on ground that he knew better than his own home. The killings continued. One soldier every day, the commander went on. But Collins was not just murdering my troops. He was breaking their minds. Sometimes he would wound a soldier instead of killing him, leaving the wounded man as bait for a rescue team. When we sent medics to help, he would kill them too. Other times he would leave messages at the scene, always signed with his initials. Your friends died quickly, you will not. BC. Or, tell your families you fought bravely. BC. Vexthul's forearms were shaking openly now. The worst message came after he killed Lieutenant Morshan, my second in command. The note said, I know where you sleep, Commander. I know what you eat for breakfast. I know the names of your children back home, but I'm not ready for you yet. BC. My soldiers stopped sleeping. They stopped eating regular meals. They jumped at every sound in the forest. Some of them began shooting at shadows, wasting ammunition on nothing. Others refused to leave the base at all, even when ordered. The unit I had commanded for 5 years was falling apart because of one human with a rifle. The commander paused and wiped moisture from his eyes. After 18 days, we were down to 20 soldiers. Collins had killed 18 of my troops, and I had no idea how to stop him. That night, I made the decision to abandon our position and retreat to the main base in the city. I was not going to let him kill any more of my soldiers. But as we prepared to leave, one of my scouts found something in the forest. Sergeant Ben Collins was dead. He had been killed 3 days earlier by a piece of shrapnel from one of our random artillery strikes. His body was hidden in a cave, along with his rifle and a journal where he had been planning his attacks. The chamber was completely silent as Vexthul continued. Do you understand what this means? For 3 days after Collins died, my soldiers continued to die. Someone else was killing them and signing his name to the messages. When we investigated further, we discovered the truth. Collins had trained local human civilians to continue his work if he was killed. An old man named Pete, a teenage girl named Amy, and a woman named Sarah had been watching him hunt my soldiers and learning his methods. They were not soldiers. They had no military training. But they had watched Sergeant Collins for weeks, and they understood what he was doing. When he died, they picked up where he left off, using his name to continue terrorizing my troops. They kept killing my soldiers one by one until we finally retreated. Representative Cathara spoke again. What happened to these civilian hunters? We never caught them, Vexthul admitted. When we abandoned the position, they disappeared back into the population like they had never existed. For all I know, they are still alive somewhere, still remembering what Sergeant Collins taught them. The commander straightened up and looked around the chamber. But Collins was not the only hunter the humans created. While my company was being terrorized in the mountains, other human soldiers were conducting similar campaigns across the planet. Private Amy Rodriguez turned the city of New Boston into a death trap that took 6 months to clear. Rodriguez was a demolitions expert who stayed behind when the human military evacuated the city. She spent weeks placing explosives and booby traps in buildings, sewers, and streets. But she did not set them off randomly. She waited and watched, learning our patrol routes and habits. Then she began triggering the explosives manually, one trap at a time, always making sure to cause maximum casualties. Vexthul's voice grew grim. Rodriguez turned warfare into an art form. She would detonate a small explosive to wound soldiers, then trigger a larger bomb when the rescue teams arrived. She mined the roads we used most often, but waited weeks before activating the mines, so we would grow careless and stop checking for them. She even booby-trapped the bodies of dead Zephyrian soldiers, so that when we tried to recover them for burial, more of our troops would die. For 4 months, Private Rodriguez killed an average of 5 Zephyrian soldiers every day. Not in open combat, but through careful planning and patient execution. She studied us like a scientist studies insects, learning our weaknesses and exploiting them. My people began to fear entering any building in New Boston, walking down any street, or touching anything that looked out of place. When we finally cornered Rodriguez in an old-school building, we expected to find a hardened killer. Instead, we found a young woman, maybe 23 years old, with short red hair and green eyes. She was sitting in a classroom, surrounded by explosives wired to detonate if anyone tried to capture her alive. The commander's voice became softer, more respectful despite the horror he was describing. She looked at us and said, "You gentlemen have been keeping me very busy these past few months. I hope you have enjoyed our little game as much as I have." Then she smiled and said, "Class dismissed." The explosion destroyed the entire building and killed 12 of my soldiers. But the most disturbing hunter was Colonel Matt Hayes, a human, strategic officer who understood something terrible about warfare. He realized that the best way to defeat us was not to kill our soldiers, but to make us into monsters. Vexthul's 4 hands clenched into fists. Colonel Hayes created false intelligence reports about human civilian shelters and refugee camps. He made sure these reports reached our commanders, knowing that we would attack the shelters to demoralize the human population. But every shelter was actually a carefully prepared killing ground, filled with explosives and defended by hidden soldiers. Each time we attacked what we thought was a camp full of innocent civilians, we found ourselves walking into a trap that killed dozens of our troops. But the worst part was that Hayes made sure some real civilians were present at each site. When we attacked, we ended up killing both human soldiers and human innocents. Hayes knew that killing civilians would haunt our soldiers psychologically. He knew that Zephyrian troops who believed they had murdered innocent people would lose their effectiveness in combat. He was willing to sacrifice human civilians to break the minds of our warriors. And it worked. The commander's voice cracked with emotion. Within months, half of our invasion force was suffering from what human psychologists call post-traumatic stress. Commander Vexthul's breathing became labored as he prepared to continue his testimony. The alien representatives in the council chamber could see that he was struggling to maintain his composure. His 4 arms trembled constantly now, and his blue-scaled face was wet with tears that he no longer tried to hide. "What I have told you so far," he said, his voice barely steady, "was only the beginning of our nightmare. The hunting, the psychological warfare, the impossible soldiers, all of that was just humans defending their world. But eventually, my commanders decided that we could not win a conventional war against the humans. So they made a decision that damned us all." The commander paused and looked down at his hands. The Zephyrian High Command ordered the complete orbital bombardment of all human-occupied worlds in the system. Not just military targets, but entire planets, cities full of civilians, hospitals, schools, everything. They called it total sterilization to end the war quickly. "I was against this decision," Vexthul said quickly, looking up at the council members. "Many of us were, but we were soldiers, and we followed orders. We told ourselves that it would save lives in the long run by ending the war. We told ourselves that the humans had forced us to make this choice. We told ourselves many lies to make it easier to sleep at night." The commander's voice grew quieter, more broken. The bombardment was scheduled to begin at dawn on a Tuesday, but the night before something happened that I will never forget for the rest of my life. General Kate Murphy, the human commander of all forces on New Denver, sent us a transmission on an open frequency that everyone could hear. I expected her to threaten us or beg for mercy or curse us for what we were about to do. Instead, she did something that broke the hearts of every soldier who heard her voice. She forgave us. Vexthul closed his eyes, remembering. General Murphy was maybe 50 years old, with gray hair and kind eyes. She looked into the camera and said, "To the Zephyrian soldiers who are preparing to destroy our worlds, I want you to know that we understand why you are doing this. You are tired of fighting. You want to go home to your families. You want this war to end. We understand because we want the same things." Then she said, "We forgive you for what you are about to do. We know that many of you do not want to. Kill civilians. We know that you are following orders from commanders who see no other way to win. We do not hate you for choosing to end this war in the only way you know how." The commander's voice cracked completely. But then General Murphy said something that haunts me every day. She said, "However, I want you to remember something. We will never forget what happened here. Not the courage of our soldiers, not the sacrifice of our civilians, not the children, who died defending their homes. Someday, somewhere, other humans will remember us, and when they do, they will come looking for you, not with hatred but with justice." The transmission continued for 6 hours while our bombardment destroyed her planet. Vexthul continued, tears flowing freely down his face. As the bombs fell and cities burned, General Murphy read the names of every human who had died in the war. Soldiers, civilians, children, elderly people. She read them all. Thousands and thousands of names, spoken clearly and calmly while the world ended around her. Between names, she would tell us stories about some of the people who had died. Lieutenant Jake Morrison, age 24, from Ohio. He liked to paint landscapes and wanted to be an art teacher after the war. Corporal Lisa Chen, age 29, from Texas. She had twin daughters and coached youth soccer on weekends. Private Kevin Walsh, age 19, from Maine. He joined the military to pay for college and wanted to be a doctor. The commander had to stop speaking for several minutes to compose himself. The council chamber waited in respectful silence. General Murphy continued reading names even as the building she was in began to collapse from the bombardment. Her voice never changed, never showed fear or anger or despair. She just kept reading names and telling us about the people we had killed. When the transmission finally ended, it was not because she stopped talking. It was because there was no one left alive to operate the transmitter. Representative Cathara spoke softly. "Commander, how did this affect your troops?" "It destroyed us," Vexthul replied immediately. "Not physically, but mentally and spiritually. We had won the war, but at a cost that made victory meaningless. Half of our soldiers refused to celebrate. Many requested immediate transfer to other duties. Some just sat in their quarters and stared at the walls. But the worst was yet to come," the commander continued. "During the bombardment, there was one human who kept working until the very end. Dr. Sam Wright was a medic assigned to the Human Military Hospital in New Portland. When the bombing started, he could have evacuated with the other medical staff. Instead, he stayed behind to treat wounded soldiers from both sides. Dr. Wright was maybe 60 years old, with white hair and gentle hands. When Zephyrian soldiers were brought to his hospital with injuries, he treated them exactly the same as human patients. He worked for 18 hours straight, performing surgery while bombs fell outside, trying to save anyone who could be saved." Vexthul's voice became softer, more respectful. "Near the end, when the hospital was collapsing around him, some of my soldiers found Dr. Wright in the operating room. He was trying to perform surgery on a wounded Zephyrian corporal while the ceiling fell, down in pieces. The human doctor looked up at my soldiers and said, 'I could use some help here. This young man is going to live if we can stop the bleeding.' My soldiers, who had been trained to see humans as enemies, found themselves holding surgical instruments and following orders from a human doctor who was trying to save their comrades' life. They worked together for 2 hours, human and Zephyrian, trying to preserve life while death rained down from the sky. Dr. Wright died when the final beam collapsed, but he died with his hands on a patient, still trying to heal instead of harm. The Zephyrian corporal survived because of what that human doctor did in his final moments." The commander looked around the chamber. representatives of the council. That image of Dr. Wright working to save enemy soldiers while his world burned around him broke something fundamental in our military culture. Many of our troops began questioning everything they had been taught about warfare, about enemies, about what it means to be a soldier. But the person who was most affected was my immediate superior, Commander Zeftal Norhan. He had been a career military officer for 30 years, a decorated veteran who believed deeply in the honor and necessity of war. Commander Zeftal had personally ordered the execution of human prisoners to end their suffering quickly, rather than let them die slowly from their wounds. Vexthal's 4 hands clenched into fists. After the bombardment ended, Commander Zeftal spent hours every day staring at his hands. The same hands that had held weapons, signed execution orders, and commanded troops in battle. He would sit in his office, looking at his hands, and whisper the names that General Murphy had read during her final transmission. Within a month, Commander Zeftal could no longer give orders effectively. He would start to command a patrol, then stop in the middle of speaking and ask, "But what if there are children in that building?" He would plan military operations, then cancel them because he could not stop thinking about civilian casualties. Other officers tried to help him, but the damage was too deep. Commander Zeftal had seen too much, done too much, lost too much of his soul during the war. He retired from military service and returned to his homeworld, where he spent his remaining years working in an orphanage, trying to care for children to make up for the ones he had helped kill. The commander's voice became barely audible. "Representatives of the council, we won the war against humanity. We conquered their worlds, eliminated their military forces, and achieved complete victory. But that victory cost us everything that made us who we were. We became killers of children, destroyers of hospitals, murderers of doctors and teachers and artists. The humans never surrendered because they could not imagine a life under our rule. They fought to the death because they believed their freedom was worth more than their lives. And in the end, they were right. We won their worlds, but we lost our souls." After the war ended, recruitment for the Zephyrian military dropped by 70%. Young people no longer wanted to be soldiers after hearing stories about what we had done. Veterans suffered from nightmares and depression at rates never seen before in our history. Many took their own lives rather than live with the memories of what they had done. The Zephyrian Empire became militarily powerful enough to conquer any world we wanted, Vexthul concluded. But we never fought another war, not because we became peaceful, but because our soldiers were no longer capable of effective warfare. The humans had shown us what total war really meant, and we discovered that we did not have the stomach for it. The commander looked directly at Representative Kethara. "We won every battle against the humans. We achieved total victory. But in defeating them, we defeated ourselves. That is why I am here today, speaking to you about events that happened 15 years ago. Because the war against humanity never really ended. It just moved inside our heads where it continues to destroy us every day." Commander Vexthul stood quietly for a long moment after finishing his account of the war's end. The alien representatives in the council chamber sat in stunned silence, processing everything they had heard. The commander's forearms hung at his sides, and his blue-scaled face showed the exhaustion of someone who had finally shared a burden he had carried alone for 15 years. Representative Kethara was the first to speak. "Commander Vexthul, you have given us a detailed account of the human-Zephyrian war, but this committee was formed to investigate war crimes. Are you saying that your people committed crimes during this conflict?" Vexthul looked at her with tired eyes. "Representative, I am saying that the concept of war crimes became meaningless during our conflict with humanity. The humans forced us to choose between losing the war or becoming monsters. We chose to become monsters, and that choice destroyed us more completely than any military defeat could have. But there is something else you need to understand," the commander continued, his voice growing stronger. "Something that affects every species in this galaxy. The war against humanity did not just change the Zephyrian Empire. It changed how warfare itself is conducted throughout known space." The insect representative clicked its mandibles nervously. "What do you mean, Commander?" "After news of our war spread, 17 different species quietly reformed their military doctrines. Vexthul explained. Not because human tactics were superior, but because traditional warfare seemed inadequate after seeing what humans could accomplish. The bird-like Corvan Confederacy now trains every soldier in psychological resistance techniques. The Hive Lords teach their warriors about the importance of civilian morale. The Tree People of Verdania have completely restructured their military to avoid situations where they might have to bomb civilian targets. The commander walked slowly around the speaking podium, his forearms gesturing as he spoke. More importantly, no major power in the galaxy has started a war of conquest since our conflict with humanity ended. Not because we have all become peaceful, but because every military leader now asks the same question before planning any operation. What if we are fighting humans? The humans are not even a major military power, Vexthul continued. They have maybe 50 colonies scattered across 3 star systems. Their total population is less than most single worlds of the major empires. Their technology is still decades behind ours. But every species in the galaxy fears them. Representative Kethera leaned forward. Commander, if the humans are so few in number and technologically inferior, why do they inspire such fear? Because, Vexthul replied, we learned that humans do not fight wars the way other species do. When most races face overwhelming odds, they surrender or retreat or try to negotiate. Humans do something different. They become more dangerous as the situation becomes more hopeless. The commander's voice grew more intense. Every species has limits to what they will sacrifice for victory. The Corvan will fight until they lose 30% of their forces, then withdraw. The Hive Lords will accept defeat if their queen is threatened. The Verdanians will surrender if their sacred groves are endangered. But humans have no such limits. They will sacrifice everything, their lives, their worlds, their future, rather than accept defeat. This means that any war against humanity automatically becomes a war of extermination, Vexthul explained. There can be no partial victory, no negotiated peace, no reasonable settlement. Either you destroy every single human completely, or they will eventually find a way to strike back. And destroying billions of intelligent beings is a line that most civilized species cannot cross. The commander paused, looking around the chamber. But there is something even more disturbing than human military capabilities, something that took us years to understand. Humans are not naturally aggressive. In peacetime, they are among the most cooperative and compassionate species in the galaxy. They form alliances easily, trade fairly, and generally try to avoid conflict. This makes them more dangerous, not less, Vexthul said. When an aggressive species like the Zephyrians go to war, other races expect it. They prepare for it. They understand our motivations. But when humans go to war, it means something terrible has happened. It means someone has threatened something they consider sacred, and that makes them unpredictable. The tree-like representative from Verdania spoke in its slow, creaking voice. Commander, are you suggesting that the human capacity for violence is somehow connected to their capacity for peace? Exactly, Vexthul replied immediately. The same love that makes humans gentle, neighbors and caring parents also makes them terrible enemies. A human who will die to protect their child will also kill to protect their child. A human who will sacrifice their comfort to help a stranger will also sacrifice their life to save that stranger. The emotions are connected. During our war, I saw human soldiers cry over dead civilians, then go out and kill Zephyrian troops with cold efficiency. I saw human doctors treat enemy wounded in the morning, then plant bombs to kill enemy patrols in the evening. They were not hypocrites or mentally disturbed. They were simply humans doing whatever was necessary to protect what they loved. The commander's voice became quieter, more thoughtful. Representatives of the council, I have spent 15 years trying to understand what makes humans different from other species. I believe the answer is that humans have no separation between their capacity for love and their capacity for violence. Most species see these as opposite emotions, but for humans, they are the same emotion applied in different circumstances. Suddenly the chamber doors opened, and a new figure entered. She was tall and slender, with brown hair streaked with gray and calm blue eyes. She wore the simple blue uniform of a human diplomatic envoy, with no weapons or military decorations visible. Every alien in the chamber turned to stare at her. "I apologize for interrupting," the human woman said in a clear, steady voice. "I am Admiral Susan Blake, representing humanity in this investigation. I was informed that Commander Vexthul was giving testimony about the war, and I felt it was important to be present." The chamber fell completely silent. Many of the representatives had never seen a human in person before, and they studied Admiral Blake with intense curiosity mixed with fear. Representative Cathara recovered first. "Admiral Blake, you are welcome to observe these proceedings. Commander Vexthul has been describing his experiences during the conflict between your species and the Zephyrian Empire." Admiral Blake nodded respectfully to Vexthul. "Commander, I have heard your testimony through the public broadcast. I want you to know that humanity appreciates your honesty about what happened during the war. It takes courage to speak truthfully about difficult events." Vexthul looked at the human admiral with a mixture of respect and old fear. "Admiral, I have spent 15 years wondering if any humans survived what we did to your worlds. I am glad to see that some did, but I am also terrified of what your people might want from us now." Admiral Blake's expression remained calm and kind. "Commander, we want nothing from you except what we have always wanted, to be left alone to live our lives in peace. The war between our species ended 15 years ago. Humanity has no interest in revenge or conquest. We are too busy rebuilding our worlds and caring for our people. But," she continued, and her voice took on a slightly harder edge, "we have not forgotten what happened. Every human child learns about New Denver, New Boston, and New Portland. They learn about Lieutenant Jake Morrison, Captain Lisa Hart, Major Alex Stone, and all the others who died defending our worlds. They learn about General Kate Murphy's final broadcast and Dr. Sam Wright's dedication to healing." Admiral Blake looked directly at Vexthul. "We remember these things not to fuel hatred, but to ensure that we never again find ourselves unprepared for war. Human colonies now have better defenses, our military is larger and more experienced, and our civilian population is trained for resistance operations. If anyone threatens our worlds again, we will be ready." The commander's 4 hands began to shake again. "Admiral, are you threatening us?" "No, Commander," Admiral Blake replied gently. "I am simply explaining why no species has attacked human worlds since our war ended. Not because we are aggressive, but because everyone understands that fighting humans means fighting a species that would rather die than surrender. Most civilized races prefer to find other solutions to their problems." She paused and looked around the chamber at all the alien representatives. "The galaxy has actually become more peaceful since our war with the Zephyrian Empire. When every species knows that conflict might escalate beyond acceptable limits, everyone tries harder to avoid conflict entirely. In a strange way, the terrible things that happened during our war have prevented many other wars from starting." Representative Cathara spoke carefully. "Admiral Blake, does humanity have any recommendations for this committee's investigation?" "Only this," the Admiral replied. "Judge the events of 15 years ago in their proper context. Commander Vexthul and his soldiers were fighting a war they did not understand against an enemy they had never encountered before. They made choices that haunted them for the rest of their lives. But those choices also taught the galaxy important lessons about the true cost of warfare.